What's the latest in the Israel-Hamas War? The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip has reported that today, day 314 of the war, the number of Palestinian deaths in the Gaza Strip has crossed 40,000. In light of this, the following video is going to attempt to clarify the different numbers being reported in the war, including Palestinian deaths in the Gaza Strip, how many Israeli hostages remain in Gaza, and Israeli casualties throughout the war. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. So evaluating the different numbers being reported throughout the war, there's often a lot of confusion, with many people presuming that each side is trying to skew the number of casualties for some sort of political gain. In order to try to make some sense, I'm going to tackle three of the main issues that are most often debated: Palestinian casualties within the Gaza Strip, Israeli hostages held by Hamas and other Palestinian organizations, as well as the number of Israeli casualties both on October 7th and throughout the war. So starting with the latest development, the report of the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, that the number of Palestinians that have been killed in the Gaza Strip has crossed 40,000 and is now on 40,005. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is part of the Hamas-run government, and this has often caused many people to cast doubt on the numbers of casualties that it reports. There are, however, several reasons that I would list in order to give credence to the reports of the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip. First, historically, the reports of the Palestinian Health Ministry have been fairly accurate. When looking back at the different escalations between Israel and Hamas throughout the past decades, the number of casualties being reported by the Palestinian Health Ministry throughout the conflict have largely been confirmed by other sources, including Israel, after the escalations ended. I'm talking about the major flare-ups of 2013, 2014, also 2019, and 2021. Second, throughout the Israel-Hamas War, many different NGOs and different government agencies, including some very reputable ones that track wartime casualties, have reviewed the reports of the Palestinian Health Ministry and have found them to be trustworthy. Some people have pointed out the fact that the United Nations revised its reporting of Palestinian casualties on May 17th, and people have often said that we should stop trusting the Palestinian Health Ministry because even the UN has said that their numbers apparently were not trustworthy. But that is actually inaccurate. It's important to note that the UN did update its ratio of how many women and children have been killed in the war. However, first of all, it did not revise the total number of Palestinian casualties that is being reported, and also the revision of the UN was relating to a different Palestinian agency. The UN said it had been relying on the Palestinian Communications Ministry of the Hamas-led government. The Communications Ministry is a far less reliable source and has often been known to skew numbers. Instead, the United Nations has actually turned to now cite the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip. So whether one finds the UN to be a credible body or not, the fact that the UN has changed its reporting on May 17th does not lend any discredit to the Palestinian Health Ministry. In fact, it adds credit to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Now the UN is referring more to that agency. Third, I'm also going to add, for those who place more faith in the publications of the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, the Israeli reports also, to some extent, have lent credence to the Palestinian Health Ministry's assessment throughout the war. Israel does not publish its own reports about the amount of Palestinian casualties in the Gaza Strip. However, on March 10th of this year, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that nearly 13,000 terror operatives have been killed in the Gaza Strip, according to Israel's estimates, adding that the ratio of civilians to terror operatives that were killed is 1 to 1.5. That is, for every terror operative that was killed, either 1 civilian or 1.5 on average civilian were killed. Now, at that time, on March 10th, the Palestinian Health Ministry was stating that 31,045 Palestinians have been killed in the war thus far, which brings Netanyahu's estimate on the total amount of Palestinians killed, militants and civilians in the Gaza Strip, to not far from the estimates of the Palestinian Health Ministry. So even the way Israel was evaluating the numbers, at least in the one time that it did allude to the amount of Palestinians that have been killed, the numbers fairly matched up to what the Palestinian Health Ministry was saying. Now, when examining the reports of the Palestinian Health Ministry, it is important to note that the ministry does not distinguish between Palestinian militants and civilians. The ministry reports solely about the number of bodies that have been registered in hospitals in the Gaza Strip. This means that in the total number are also militants, people who may have been killed in active combat, as well as civilians. It also means that number does not include Palestinians that are reported missing, likely buried under the rubble and presumed dead. These are only bodies that are accounted for going through hospitals in the Gaza Strip. However, if we do take the most updated report of 40,005 as fairly accurate, combined with the most updated report that was issued today by the IDF stating that over 17,000 Palestinian militants have been killed in the war thus far, this brings us to an extremely rough estimate of roughly 17,000 militants out of 40,000 Palestinians that have been killed in the war thus far, or a ratio of about 1 to 1.35 of militants to civilians that have been killed thus far in the war. In addition to that, the Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting that 92,401 Palestinians have been injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. The IDF has not published any estimates in the last several months about how many militants are among those injured, so right now we don't have any ratio of how many of those might have been militants that were engaged in active combat. However, in taking this as a whole, the Palestinian Health Ministry, on the one hand, is a Hamas-led agency, on the other hand, has built a reputation of being fairly accurate, and thus I continue to cite those numbers, and if we combine them with the numbers from the IDF, we are looking at roughly 17,000 militants out of roughly 40,000 Palestinians that have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began. Turning to the next topic, hostages, Israeli hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip since October 7th. In the October 7th attack, 251 hostages were kidnapped from the areas surrounding the Gaza Strip and taken back into Gaza by the different militants who were attacking. You may have heard the number quoted as 255 rather than 251. The number of 255 includes 4 Israelis who had been held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip prior to the war. 2 of them are soldiers, IDF soldiers, who were killed in 2014. Their bodies are held, and 2 of them are live citizens. Thus, the number is 251 who were kidnapped on October 7th, 255 hostages in total that are being negotiated throughout the war. Since October 7th, 116 hostages have been returned alive from the Gaza Strip. This includes 4 elderly women who were released by the different organizations throughout October as humanitarian gestures, quote-unquote. In addition to that, 105 hostages that were released in the hostage deal that occurred between November 24th and November 30th. This included 81 Israelis and 24 foreign nationals who were released. In addition to that, 7 Israeli hostages were rescued by the IDF throughout the war. In addition to that, the bodies of 24 hostages have been recovered from the Gaza Strip. This includes 3 that were killed by live IDF fire, others that were killed in the Gaza Strip or that were killed on October 7th, and their bodies were retrieved by the IDF. In total, that means that including the 4 that were held in the Gaza Strip prior to the war, there are currently 115 hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip. Of these, the IDF has confirmed that 41 are already dead. According to different intelligence estimates that have been leaked in the last several months, different intelligence agencies, specifically in Israel and the United States, estimate that the number of live hostages in the Gaza Strip is actually much lower. It may only be between 50 and 70. Again, those are leaks. The number that has been confirmed by Israel, according to intelligence, is 41 out of 115 that are confirmed dead. The rest are being treated as though they are alive in the current negotiations. With that, it's also important to note that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have put out different videos and statements throughout the last several months in which they have stated that different hostages have been killed throughout the war. Sometimes the IDF has confirmed these statements, sometimes not. Again, the number of 41 that I am reporting is only those that Israel has confirmed are in fact considered dead as far as the military is concerned when it comes to the negotiations. Now, lastly, I'm going to turn to the other topic I often get asked about when it comes to confusion of numbers, and that is the number of Israelis that were killed on October 7th and how many have been killed in the ongoing fighting. In the October 7th attack, 1,195 Israelis were killed on that day. Sometimes there's some confusion because people report that 800 in the range of 830 civilian citizens were killed. This is because of those 1,195, 366 were IDF soldiers and security officials, which was why there's sometimes some confusion, because sometimes the soldiers are counted separately as casualties in the war, sometimes they are counted within those that were killed in the October 7th attack. In total, in that attack, including soldiers and civilians, 1,195 Israelis were killed, of which 366 were IDF soldiers and security officials. In addition to that, roughly 3,300 Israelis were injured on October 7th, again, of whom 1,030 were soldiers. Alongside this, since the invasion of the Gaza Strip in the latter part of October, a total of 330 IDF soldiers have been killed in the Gaza Strip, alongside 2,208 who have been injured. Again, sometimes there's some confusion, because sometimes people cite that 700 IDF soldiers have been killed in the war in Gaza, but in fact that includes the soldiers that were killed on October 7th and those that were killed in the invasion. Those that have been killed in the invasion, the active fighting in Gaza, is 330. 366 were killed in the October 7th attack. In addition to all these, it's also important to note that the number of Palestinians killed and injured, as well as Israeli soldiers and civilians that are reported killed and injured, do not commonly include the other arenas of the war in which which there's ongoing fighting and violent eruptions. These include the ongoing fighting between the IDF and Hezbollah, which has claimed dozens of Israeli civilians and soldiers in the northern parts of Israel, as well as hundreds of Hezbollah operatives and Lebanese civilians in the southern parts of Lebanon, as well as the ongoing fighting in the West Bank, which has become far more volatile and involves almost daily Israeli and Palestinian attacks, IDF raids and arrests, ongoing fighting at a much larger rate than before the war began. Again, that is its own arena. The numbers there are often reported separately. However, it's important to know that those are also facets of the war. Sometimes there's confusion because sometimes different organizations, such as the Palestinian Prisoners Society, will report total numbers of Palestinians that were arrested. This includes both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So it's also just important to remember that when you're hearing different reports of numbers, to be accurate about what exactly they are reporting on. With that, I hope that this has helped people to try to follow the war and unpack the very complex arenas and the reporting about the ongoing fighting. The reason I touched on these three topics is because that's what I get asked most about. However, let me know if you have any questions or comments. You can list them in the comment section below, and I'll either respond in comments or put out another video if any more clarifications are needed. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.